So, it's been an honor just to be on this process with everybody here. There's a couple questions that we have that we've all kind of chosen. How did your calling to be a pastor occur?
So I've kind of gone back and forth on this question. I feel like my voice is a little echoey. Can you hear me okay? Yeah. Okay. When I was 8, I made the decision to be baptized in, the church of my parents, and it was a very conservative evangelical congregation. But even back then, I understood that, the calling of Christianity, or at least the calling I was interested in, was the greatest commandment: love God and love others, love your neighbor. And throughout my life, that's been a through line. That's what I've been most interested in. That's why through the hard times and the easy times, I've kept remaining a part of spiritual community. That's what I'm interested in. And I'm a high context sharer. I'm going to do my best to try to keep it a little small.
You're good.
Tanner's like, done. Next one.
I mean, no, you can continue if you want. It's all you.
All right.
But, I think, what is the hope for our community?
Okay, all right. I'll share more about the other one some other time. Yes. Talk to me afterwards. Yes. My hope for the community, I've got a few. There's another high context.
Go for it.
Okay.
Go for it.
One of my hopes, and this is very personal for me, is for partners. Partners in doing that work. Partners in doing the Jesus stuff. Loving God, loving neighbor, loving ourselves. I've tried doing that on my own. It's hard. It's a lot harder to do it on your own than with a good community. My hope is that my family will have companionship in that as well. That my kids are going to grow into adults who know that they are loved and supported by at least one group of grown-ups. I can't tell you how they're going to be supported in school. I can't tell you how our neighbors are going to respond or who those people are going to be, but my hope is that they'll at least have one place and one group that they feel safe and loved by. I hope that I perhaps can have a place to grow old in, and a group to grow old with. That's a way of me saying I don't really want to keep going. I don't want to go to another group. I would like to be able to settle in. My hope is that I can be a part of a group of people doing so much of the work you're already doing. I get so tired of feeling like I need to convince people that if they care about the Jesus stuff, then they need to care about their neighbors. You already know that. And I saw that on your search and call document. A 26-page profile, by the way. Substantial. But one of the things that was abundantly clear and repeated throughout is that when we talk about the ministry of this church, you're talking about your neighbors and the people in this building. You're talking about doing that work together because you care about the Park Groves area. I'm interested in having the conversations that come after a group of people have already started doing and have been doing the work of community with their neighbors. The conversation not of like, hey, why should I care, but rather, hey, I care and it hurts sometimes. I care and I made a mistake. What do I do now? I hope to be a part of a group of people who are already doing that work but want to go further and want to keep going and want to bring in other partners because the needs seem endless, right? This is the stuff that gets me most excited, and it's where some of the greatest need in our world is. I also have a hope that for so many people who have a shared life experience that I have, where they've come out of another group, a toxic group, maybe it was toxic theologically, or it was toxic, in practice. Maybe it's a religious group, maybe it's not, but I hope that this could be a group of people they can heal with, I'm deeply interested in providing space for those who may be deconstructing, but often deconstructing is just a form of healing, right? So those are my hopes, and I can keep going, but that's probably enough context, right?
She has, she has a follow-up question. Okay. You're totally fine.
Well, I was about to ask actually like how you view the church's role in unpacking or healing religious trauma. You mentioned being raised super conservative evangelical and that
Yeah.
raised that question. You kind of touched on it, but like what does that action look like for the church to create that space to you? Like what
To
is
provide
that?
support for
Yeah.
those who are healing from that kind of hurt.
Yeah.
It's multifaceted, I think. At the core of it is relationship. You know, what good is it to come and be a part of a church if there's no relationships in it? On the one hand, I've done that before, and I recognize there was a series, a little bit of time I had to be anonymous, but I don't feel like a lot of my healing happened until I found support around me. And that doesn't look like a group of people telling me what to believe. What it looks like is a group of people saying, do you want to talk about it? You want to go out for coffee? We also don't have to talk about it. We could just do work stuff. It looks like people just choosing to be community and differentiating, saying, you don't have to believe God, in God the same way I do, or at all. We're not going to kick you out if you have a different position on this issue or that issue. But we do want to know how you're doing. And we want to know if you want to have dinner sometime. I was a part of First Christian Church when I was received into a mainline denomination. That was the group that first extended that invitation to me. But I didn't feel like I was a part of that community, really, and that I had support until 2 months in, this group of people who always went out for lunch afterwards turned to Stephanie and I and said, "Hey, you want to go to Rogues? We're just going to walk over to Rogues. You want to go get a beer with us?" That's when I felt like, I think I'm okay. I think I'm going to be okay. You know what I mean? Yeah. I imagine some of you have shared experience in that, right? Resources are also great. I could provide resources, but I don't think the resources mean as much without relationships. Yeah. Thank you for asking.
I'm interested in your opinion or your perspective on how to continue our role as an open and affirming church. We've welcomed the gay community, the LGBTQAI. Is that enough? Thanks. And we had a gay pastor for a while, and it was a wonderful experience for the entire congregation. And I know that we've lost some of our gay and lesbian members or regular attenders. So do you have a way, how are you going to address that?
Sure. It's so needed today, too, right?
Yes.
I mean, it's always been needed, but it feels especially evident today. One thing is, there's always more learning that has to happen. And I think that learning often involves difficult conversations. Open and affirming should not be like a one and done process.
No.
It's just like a commitment to anti-racism work. You know, you can't just say like one day, well, I'm anti-racist now, so I'm good. I don't really have anything else that I need to work on. I don't need to read anything else. I don't need to have any more difficult conversations. Those conversations have to keep happening. And I think the region has resources for that we can keep tapping into. The general church does as well. It also, I think, involves having a proclamation of it. You know, this is something this church ought to be proud of. You do have a history of welcoming and affirming LGBTQIA plus people. So, you know, have it plastered everywhere you could. Brio got so excited to see some rainbows in here. In a world where a rainbow can be a mark on you, I know it can be scary, but we got to have skin in the game because we have so many people who don't get a choice on whether or not other people get to know it or see it. You know, this is like a don't hide your light under a bushel type thing. You got to let it shine, right? How appropriate for the prism of the rainbow. I also think that there's issues happening around the country that we have to keep speaking to. You know, it gets so tiresome to talk about them, to talk about like the painful legislation happening. But part of the reason why we need to talk about it is because it ought to be condemned. You know, the Jesus stuff demands we condemn that stuff because that's what Jesus would be doing. And that's what I believe, you know, God's leading us towards. I saw this church, my introduction to this church was when you all put your skin in the game for Don. I saw that news report. I know a number of you were there that Sunday when gentlemen came in and started shouting down Don and condemning him. And I saw this church form a protective wall between this gentleman and Don, right? And then I met Don like 2 or 3 weeks after that. I don't know, it might have been 2 months. I can't remember. It was at conference in Pendleton. I didn't know that's who he was at first. And we started talking. That meant so much to Don. And it's so unusual that it was broadcasted on the news, right? It shouldn't be unusual. But keep doing that stuff. Keep up the partnership with We Shine. Keep learning. Keep rubbing shoulders with neighbors. Find those opportunities for partnership. I would love to keep finding those opportunities for partnership. Yeah.
So I've been part of this congregation for more than 6 years, and I've noticed that sometimes, not all the time, when we start a new program, it lasts for a year or two and then dissipates.
Mm.
So people are reluctant to start a new program because this is what happens. What are your ideas about building and maintaining community and providing support for activities in the church?
That's a good question. I think so my approach is to try to support those people who are doing the programmatic work. You know, obviously the pastor also does some programmatic work, but there's people who have already started things or who need to be empowered to start things and to keep that going. So my interest would be in continuing to provide pastoral and spiritual support in that. You know, maybe having programmatic meetings where people all come together for these different ministries, or maybe those need to be one-on-one. I don't know yet. It kind of depends on what's going on with the church and what people are interested in continuing or starting anew. I will say, I find it to be a very positive thing that some new things have been tried and then stopped. Because what that tells me is this church is willing to try new things and is willing to experiment. I know it can be very disheartening when we become invested in something and then that stops. And so I'm aware that there may be some points of hurt and woundedness for that. But I think it's exciting that this church is at least willing to do that. You know, but is that does that answer your question? Is that hopeful?
Yeah, I'm wondering how your vision of developing community.
Interested in, okay. I would also love to do as many programmatic things in intentionally communal relational ways as we can. So this is one of those DNA pieces on me from my evangelical days, you know, but I did a lot of work with church plants, and small groups I think can be very helpful. For example, in my world, they were used as a control tactic. That's not helpful. I don't want that. But every week we had the opportunity to come together and support one another and have food together and also talk about something, you know? But often the thing that we're doing, the thing that we're talking about is peripheral. Yeah. It's a reason to get together and to do the life stuff, you know? And through that channel we get well, how are you actually doing? Well, my kid has gone off to college and I don't know what to do with myself, and I don't want to share with them that hurts, but it kind of hurts a little bit. Well, people need a space and a people to share that with, right? Also, how do we have the difficult conversations? We can just have a class. Classes are great. Sometimes we need classes. But I'd be interested in making that as relational as possible. We have roundtables. We have the opportunity to actually have deep conversation about this or that. A lot of the stuff that I've already talked about, I think, needs to be tried on and have some back and forth around, right? With safe people before we go out into the rest of the world. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of things that can be done in a more intentionally relational way. Mm-hmm. Fellowship time. There are some churches who still are not doing fellowship time, but that was like the best part of a Sunday, right? Mm-hmm. And so for some of those churches that have not done that yet, that's what they deeply yearn for. At Lynchwood, the church that I'm currently pastor of, they had this history of doing second Sunday lunch. So once a month, they would go out to a restaurant together. But we needed to reach a point where we could give ourselves permission to go back out to dinner with each other, mm-hmm. right? Mm-hmm. Those are good things. Those are the life things. But sometimes we need to create like some sort of ritual or ceremony around it for it to happen. Mm-hmm. Well, it's got to happen on the second Sunday of the month. It obviously can't happen on the third or the fourth because it's always been on the second Sunday, right? So, and I imagine you have rituals and practices and traditions that could be tapped into, you know. I also imagine you're already doing some of those things. They're worth continuing.
Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate your perspective.
Yeah, and thank you for clarifying, because I was being a little dense.
I'm sorry if I screwed this up for the guitar guys. You'll have to reposition your microphone. I think that's it for the portion of our Q&A. Thank you for those who ask questions. I'm sure I always have a million questions after the fact, but I feel like there will be times to get those questions answered. So I want to thank Tanner and Jessica for overseeing that piece. So, there you go.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes.
Before I share the modern testimony, I do want to point out the vote for me is not, I don't view it as a given. I don't want you to feel like this is just a technicality. If you have a reservation about taking me on as your pastor, this is an important decision, and please vote accordingly, all right? If you hate the way I preach, because I'm going to give you a little taste in a bit, if you didn't like these answers, listen to yourself and vote, okay? That's important to me. I think that's important to God. This is from Love in the Time of Cholera by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. He allowed himself to be swayed by his conviction that human beings are not born once and for all on the day their mothers give birth to them, but that life obliges them over and over again to give birth to themselves.
Good morning, dear friends. The reading today is from Acts chapter 2, verses 1 to 4, the message. When the feast of Pentecost came, they were all together in one place. Without warning, there was a sound like a strong wind, gale force. No one could tell where it came from. It filled the whole building. Then, like a wildfire, the Holy Spirit spread through their ranks, and they started speaking in a number of different languages as the Spirit prompted them.
Thank you. When I was in seminary, I was looking for the group I was going to be a part of. I lost a lot of my previous group. We started taking some stances on things they didn't really like. And I met with the then pastor of Salt and Light Lutheran Church, Reverend Melissa Reed. She's also co-founder of the Leaven Community. And I told her, concerned about so many of our churches closing. You know, is it foolish for me to become a pastor when so many of our churches are dying? And she looked me right in the eyes. We were out on a walk. She had her kid in the stroller, but she paused for this. She looked me right in the eyes and she said, "Of course our churches are dying. That's just what churches do. Churches are always dying. They're always dying, and they're always being reborn. That's the nature of Christianity. We are always dying, and we're always being reborn." The question is, what are we being reborn as? What is the church in the United States being reborn as? What is the church in Portland being reborn as? What is this church being reborn as? And I've thought of this often. Resurrection people has become one of my favorite ways of thinking about the church. I believe Melissa on this. I think she's right. And it helps me not live in fear of our institutions dying. I'm more concerned about what are they being reborn as. Ever since the beginning, the church has been dying and reborn. Even after Pentecost, or even before Pentecost, rather, which is how we mark the official birth of the church, the precursor of the church had to die, right? So before Pentecost, being a follower of Jesus looked like eating with Jesus and walking with Jesus and talking with Jesus and listening to Jesus and noodling on really difficult questions that Jesus would ask and often have no intention of answering, right? And for many of the disciples, many of the followers, they assumed that Jesus was going to inaugurate their liberation from Rome. So they carried that hope with them. And then one day, Jesus is killed by the empire that they think Jesus is going to liberate them from. And they realize that their understanding of the world and their understanding of Jesus isn't quite working. Following Jesus changed. Their followership, their discipleship died. Tacitus, who is a critic of the church, which is putting it mildly, acknowledges this even in one of his writings. He says, you know, there is this group of people, they followed this Jesus guy, and, you know, he died and it looked like they died. And then they came back. You know, he notes it like this was a a particularly spectacular thing to him, or just unusual, right? So, when Jesus is said to have resurrected, we see this shift. Following Jesus looks different now for them. Their understanding of Jesus looks different. They're eating and they're drinking with Jesus again, but Jesus died. They're walking with Jesus on the road to Emmaus, but he looks different. They don't recognize him, right? It's not until they're dining that they recognize him. And that's all great, but then Jesus up and leaves again. And so following Jesus looks different again. And they are wrestling with these things. They are in their homes or in the homes of some of the believers over in Jerusalem, hiding, for their own safety, but also trying to understand what has just happened. What does this all mean now? How do I see the world now? How do we move forward now? And 2 months after Jesus is killed, we get this remarkable event where the Spirit of God is said to have filled their space with a gale force winds. Some of our translations said that they have like flames of fire, tongues of fire on top of their heads. That's an interesting visual. I've always liked the medieval art that shows that because it just looks so ridiculous and fun, right? Just like human candles, But this is such a remarkable thing for them. They go out into this community where they had been hiding in fear, and they proclaim their understanding of Jesus. And they invite other people into it. And those who respond to them, what do? They get baptized, which the church has really taken on, by the time that Acts is written, as understanding as death and rebirth. Their understanding of God, their understanding of themselves and of the world dies and is reborn. But we focus on this so individualistically, and it's easy to lose sight that this group of people themselves are dying and being reborn. They're a new thing now. They're not just like disciples who are following Jesus or doing the Jesus teachings, but I see themselves as a people filled with God's Spirit. And this is unusual in their world. Like there were some mystically aligned Jewish folks who could make room for this. But most of the scripture that they're reading, this doesn't happen. Only important people have God's Spirit in them, right? It's the kings. It's the prophets. It's Moses. It's Deborah. It's Samson. Important people. Usually not women. And then Peter shares this text from the book of Joel. And the text is talking about Joel's hope of the future, where God's Spirit fills all people, slaves and free, male and female, people who are treated by their society as property, and people who are lifted up and elevated by their society. Your young men will dream dreams. Your old men will have visions. And when Peter refers to this, he's referring to it in apocalyptic, earth-shaking language, because to him, the world has now changed. To this group of people, the world is different now. They have been reborn. But the church being born this day has problems. And they're big problems. They're not small problems. They're big enough that Acts spends the rest of its time talking about them. Peter and the apostles don't know everything that they ought to know just yet. One thing that Peter does recognize is that this changes everything. What he doesn't know is that in the chapters ahead, eventually he's going to become an advocate for a group of people that he looks down on. He's going to become an advocate for Gentiles to be included in the church. But in this point, in Acts 2, when he is proclaiming, out to this group of people who killed, many of whom He had fear we're going to kill him, like Jesus was killed. He can't see that happening yet. Just like he can't see that Samaritans are going to be included, people that he views as enemies. Just like he can't see that one day an Ethiopian eunuch is going to be part of their community. He can't see yet that one day a murderer and a Pharisee is going to be a part of their community, named Saul. But this is the beginning point of everything changing. And they have this attentiveness to the Holy Spirit, this willingness to let go of what they had known to make room for this new stuff that the Spirit's leading them in. Which brings me back to this idea that the church is always dying and being reborn. In our 2,000-year history, we have seen beautiful manifestations of God's beloved community on earth flourish, only to die and be reborn, led by evil mockeries of Jesus. Can we acknowledge that's part of our history? And we have also seen the church, as promoter of injustice, die and be reborn as giver of new life and justice and healing. Can we acknowledge that that's part of our history too? So what is the church being reborn as today? Now, I have to confess that I don't like much of what the church is being reborn as today. It grieves me. I imagine it grieves you. I was in the Pride Parade last week. We were at the very end. It was the longest I've ever waited in the Pride Parade. I was so proud of Brio. He's 5 years old. He hung in there the whole time. But when it was time for for us to walk in it, he just turtled up. He's like, I'm peopled out now. So I just pushed his stroller with him hiding under the umbrella. And the person next to me is holding up a sign, and it says, "Not all Christians are evil." Now, that's the perception of people in our country, and I get it. I live in Vancouver, across the river. It took me about 18 minutes to get here this morning. Patriot Prayer regularly demonstrates over there. There's been a few times we've been out for coffee, and there goes Patriot Prayer, right at Esther Shore Park. So many Christians, and by extension, so many churches, are dead set on gutting the rights of LGBTQIA+ people in our country. And so many likewise use their voices and their pulpits to demonize efforts at equity and justice and anti-racism. This is not God's will being done on earth as it is in heaven. This is not the God of love, the God of peace that I know, that I attempt to follow. But, and this is important, I don't think it's the God that you know either. There are so many churches, not just one, and this is not the only thing that our churches are being reborn as. Those who are indifferent to our neighbors, who actively seek to harm them, are not the only Jesus followers, right? And more of our churches are doing the hard work of becoming open and affirming. Should they have done this work years ago? Absolutely. But they're doing the work now. And there will be more who will do the work tomorrow. More and more are pursuing anti-racism. And that gives me hope. More are seeking a decolonized approach to Jesus. That gives me hope. We have incredible churches that embrace love of neighbor and love of their communities, and they know they cannot love God and do any differently. I even know of one church that has converted a major portion of its property into transitional housing. Can you imagine such a thing? Now, this didn't happen six years ago. This didn't happen 6 years ago in this city. It wasn't allowed. It took a lot of work. It took a lot of work from some of our political leaders, but a lot of our religious leaders and lay people and non-religious folks, people of fierce love, we often call them, who advocated for these changes to be made. I'm grateful for it. To me, that is the Spirit of God roaring through our city, doing a new thing. And that gets me excited. That's encouraging for me. Today, some of our churches have been reborn. They've gone from houses of worship to homes for people, from baptismal founts to showers, from providing the Lord's Supper to providing regular meals. They've gone from being sanctuaries for souls to sanctuaries for full human beings. That's the Jesus stuff. That's why I'm here. That's what brought me back into churches. I imagine that's what has kept a lot of you around through some of the best and through some of the hardest moments. So Park Rose, I obviously know some of your story, but I'm wondering how else you've been reborn. How have you died and been reborn? Much has happened the last 3 years, right? A lot. You've been working hard, pursuing the leading of God with the help of Diane. So what has God's Spirit been leading you towards? Now, I don't want to spend, 30 minutes putting you all on the spot, individually interviewing you, although, that does sound really awesome to me. Yeah, I recognize we don't have the time for that, but I do want to give you all the opportunity to share. So, Erica was kind enough to put this out here, this board, and we have these Post-it notes and markers. Erica, would you be able to pass them around? Let's make it as easy as possible for people to participate. We'll bring the Post-it notes right to you. Yeah, and we can collect them. So I'm hoping for maximum involvement. Maybe put one answer per sticky note so that we can all see. Once again, I'm going to repeat my question. What are your hopes for Park Rose Community United Church of Christ? What is the dream that God, perhaps, has laid on your heart? If you're already there, you're already doing it, put that on there. It is a good thing that should be lifted up. And if it's not being done, if it's something that you hope to see done, put that on there too. If you sense that God's Spirit may be leading you towards this, may be leading this community towards that, let's write that down. Okay, enough of my talking. I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to do this. And then I'm going to call us all back, and I will let you know. You can, if you can't think of it right away, there's no reason for the rest of the service you can't write out more of these and put them on here, okay? Some people may be like me, where they need to spend 5 minutes, 10 minutes thinking of the one thing. Yeah. Okay, raise your hand if you'd like another minute. Okay, thank you. We're really taking. Thank you so much for participating, everybody. If you end up thinking of more things, please feel free to write those down. You can put them up on the board. Also, I should have said this before. If you are unable to get over here because of a mobility challenge, or you just don't want to, leave your sticky note on the chair and we could add it. Okay. We are resurrection people. And I certainly do believe that God is persistently calling us forward and pursuing the world that God desires, on earth as it is in heaven. We are Christ's community, aiming to follow the Spirit of God wherever that leads us. I wonder where the Spirit is going to lead Park Rose Community United Church of Christ. I would love to find out with all of you. Will you pray with me? Holy God, as close to us as our own breath, we thank you for your steadfast presence and empowerment. Help us to discern and join you in your work, whatever that work may be, with whomever it may be with. Help us to live as people of rebirth, emboldened by your Spirit that calls us forward. Amen.